The canyon woke before the sun did, breath thin as a blade over basalt, dust trembling in seams older than any flag. 30 Terrans lay quiet along the rim, watching 300 banners roll into a throat of stone that had learned, long ago, how to close. Orders would go in there as sentences. Would they come out as echoes? What happens when a commander's voice is louder than the rock, but the rock decides when to answer? Who walks out when gunfire barely speaks, and the map itself does the killing? 30 versus 300. 14 minutes in Mars Canyons rewrite the war. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with a friend who loves epic HFY stories. It helps more than you know. Alright, let's begin the story then. The wind over Valles Marineris could cut water from your mouth. Commander Aris Solane tasted gypsum in the air as the stars went pale and the basalt rim gained an iron edge. He had brought 30, not more. Not because he lacked men, because he didn't need them. The canyon had enough soldiers for everyone, if you asked it the right way. Dr. Niva Kestrel's hands were raw inside her thermal gloves from 2 nights of wiring pulse hammers against pillow lava seams that cooled when the world was young. Her tablet showed a ghost of the canyon's bones in layers, strata, vesicles, welded tufts, alive with the Atlas 47 PB model's predictions. 47 petabytes of orbital interferometry and ground echoes, distilled into a single idea. "We don't bury bodies," she said, voice just above the wind. "We bury orders." Aris nodded once. His visor threw him a translucent grid of safe, stands, and never-cross lines. He watched his people move, small as the insects he had pretended to be as a kid, mapping ant tunnels with a drinking straw and a garden hose. The memory pricked, unwelcome. Dirt in his throat at 8 years old, the way sound turns thick when the roof settles a little. He exhaled through it slow. He would not tell anyone that part. Below, the Arask came dressed for theater. They were tall, jointed like mantises, plates lacquered with oils that caught the thin Martian dawn. Prefect Sal Ikar rode an open command chariot with flags mounted like teeth. His voice, modulated, amplified, poured across the shelf road as if speech itself could shape stone. "Terrans in a throat they do not understand," he said to his officers, one hand lifted like a conductor. 30 against 300. "We will teach obedience before breakfast." Sentinel Black, /Relay 7B, monitoring. SNR optimal. Prefect broadcast bandwidth, high. Terrain stability, metastable. Engagement window, authorizable. Up on the rim, Laleh Miren knelt beside a white case half buried in basalt powder. She spoke to it as she pulled soft loop after soft loop of fiber and node. "All right, little ghosts, time to learn fear." She smiled without humor. Echo nodes went live along the ledges and alcoves, each one carrying a recorded human heartbeat and a flutter of breath, then modulated to sound wrong at Arask frequencies, almost like an officer in distress. It would be a kindness to call them decoys. Really, they were magnets for orders. Orrin Pike, who'd made his living cutting stone until the army promised to let him cut it legally on interesting planets, fixed a micro-det in a seam of glassy black. He did not look at the drop beside his boots, a vertical fall the height of cathedrals. He only looked at the chalk mark tied on the seam. Sheer. Left. Breathe. Sergeant Bram Ochoa stacked shaped charges like fence posts in narrow runnels that would be exits if someone were desperate and smart. Each charge was tuned not for shrapnel, for silence. They would whisper shut like a door you don't notice until it's already closed. "Last in, first out," Bram muttered, then checked his timer sync. 30 icons pulsed green. 30 people ready to ask a canyon for a favor. Aris's visor chimed. Sable Index Tactical. Authorization, Shadow Weave, /Pulse Etiquette. Engagement style, minimal kinetic. Objective, relay retake, enemy cohesion collapse. Risk to civilian geology, acceptable. He touched the acceptance rune and felt the small tremor of the pulse hammers warming into their beds. Niva's thumb hovered over the master. Her breaths fogged the lower rim of her mask. For a heartbeat, the hand shook. Memory again. The old schoolyard tunnel caving just enough to teach a lesson. Then she steadied. "On your word, Commander." Aris looked down into the mouth of the map. "Breathe," he said. The canyon obeyed. It didn't blast. It sighed. A sound like a lung too large to be kind rolled down the defile as pulse hammers kissed the pillow lava seams. Dust blossomed, not like a cloud, like a decision. Gray veils rode the wind, wrapping the Arask vanguard in arm's-length fog. The first banners flickered as static whispered up and over the shelf. Sentinel Black, /Relay 7B. Contact initiated. T+00:00:00. Arask Vanguard slows. Visibility degrades to 23%. Sol Ikar's crest plates flared in annoyance. His lieutenant, Kethvar, clicked mandibles as his scanner returned echoes that sounded frightened. Laleh's ghost heartbeats crawled into their audio, barely there. The panic of a species that breathed too fast in thin air. Advance on the left wall, Sol said, marking the path in green across 30 displays. Orrin's left-hand microdets, aligned with a seam Niva called the brother line, unlatched with a courtesy so clean it felt like gratitude. The left wall shivered, just enough to send a waist-high slide into motion, pebbles and sand hissing around legs and treads, helmets tilting down to guard eyes. It crimped the formation like a belt cinched one hole tighter. Regroup, Sol snapped, because that was what doctrine said you say when the line bunched and the slope started to talk. Behind them, Bram's first fence kissed shut with a flat whump. No light, no drama, just a mouth closing. Arask heads turned, sensors pinged, officers hissed into comms. The dust breathed back at them. Right channel now? Now, Sol ordered, voice rising, flags lifting like a torch. The right channel invited them. Laleh's fear decoys put a wounded officer there, 3 heartbeats too fast, pleading in Arask command cadence. Squad leaders followed the respect their species owed any voice that sounded like an officer dying well. Even pride bows to a specific kind of fear. They entered the right channel in 2s and 3s. Orrin's second seam split a ribbon of basalt into a half curtain, not to crush, only to narrow. The Arask filed, stretched, thinned. On the shelf above, Sol's open chariot gleamed. Niva watched the flags, each with a tiny heated globe at the tip to mark position on friend-foe. She ticked a range on her wrist and tapped a single pulse hammer against a high rib. The rib humped. Pebbled glass came down like rain. Your torch just became a lighthouse, she whispered. The chariot's beacon flared too bright in thin dust, and every drone, every sensor, every echo-noted heartbeat saw it. Laleh spiked a wash of ghost breath around it. The canyon took the word withdraw when Sol shouted it, and sent it back, not as a command, but as 3 contradictory shadows. Archive node, Meridian Gate, voice link integrity, 12%. Command channel harmonics, divergent. Semantic drift, significant. Kethvar's platoon complied with withdraw straight ahead, because the word arrived 1 fraction of a second earlier on his band than on anyone else's. The next platoon complied to their left, because the canyon kinked the modulation. The third heard a stuttered redraw and thought deploy. 1 word, 3 outcomes. Then the dust ate the punctuation, and even meaning fell. Aris Solane did not raise his rifle. The safeties on half his detachment still slept. He spoke in numbers and times, his voice a low metronome to the canyon's breath. 2 degrees more on the hammer at Station Kestrel good. Bram, post 3 is your door now, on me. Laleh, pull the ghosts from the left, hang them low in the right. Make the panic softer. Soft panic, Laleh said, a thread of humor in it. The kind that makes a hardliner think he's still in charge. Sol Ikar could still have stopped it. He could have told his men to get low and wait. He could have unrolled rope from his chariot and tied officers together in a line across the slope, to feel the pull, to read the ground with their bodies, to relearn what stone means. He was too proud to do something so small. He lifted flags. He raised his voice. Form on me. The canyon stole the on me and returned only the form. Soldiers formed into the nearest vector their feet and fear would allow. Arask armor crawlers ground forward into what looked like solid talus. The talus had been arranged by Niva during the long night, like dominoes of different sizes. The first track slid. The crawler that came to push became an anchor that also ID. The talus sighed and decided downhill was the right place for everything that could not read stone. The vehicles drifted in slow motion, like ships surrendering to tide. Sergeant Bram Ochoa watched from a raised shelf and thumbed a small brass token in his pocket. a habit from a grandfather who'd lain fences across scrubland to keep cattle from wandering into ravines. He spoke, and his voice had the respectful cadence of prayer without faith. Posts are up. He tapped his transmitter. The exit's worth using closed with little noises, as if the canyon was tucking in a blanket rather than pinning an army. Somewhere below, a squad turned toward a path and found a new wall there. Not angry, not triumphant, simply present. Sentinel Black, /Relay 7B. T+0, 3:11, Vanguard sealed. Enemy units, Bifurcation Event, X3. Armor mobility, impaired. Dust turned the world into arm's length. An Arask trooper, plates scuffed, moved by the sound of his officer's clicks. He stumbled into an echo node and heard a human heartbeat, slow and steady, exactly where no human should be. He flinched. His rifle's muzzle dropped. Nothing fired at him. The heartbeat moved away, seductive as safety, deeper into a pocket that had nothing in it but cooling dust. Up on the rim, Aris looked at Niva, and she looked back, eyes bright in the thin light. She understood better than anyone. This was a conversation with stone, and stone answers when you respect its grammar. She touched the master again. Just enough, she said. Not 1 grain more. Orrin's charges along the vertical ribs came in sequence now. They weren't explosives so much as requests. Each detachment of rock had been told in the language of stress and angle and time. Now, a rib would release, drop 3 meters, lay across a gully like a bar laid gently across a door. Nothing crushed. Everything separated. Kethvar realized, too late, what separated meant. His comm window flickered with 3 platoon icons that should have been together and were now in parallel channels, each believing the others had new assignments. He called to the prefect. Sir, we are. Static bit the end of his sentence and replaced it with 3 flat heartbeats. Saul bared teeth along one mouth rift. You are cowards. Push through. I will have their 30 heads as a lesson. Laleh heard him, swallowed a bitter laugh, and dragged a thumb along a slider. The ghost heartbeats moved away from Saul's beacon. Officers followed the echo of their own doctrine. Archive node. Meridian Gate. T+06:47. Armor immobilization finalized. Command beacon signal attenuated. Auxiliary channels. Plosive masking at 63%. Niva brushed a glove across a basalt rib and left a clean arc like clockwork. She thought of the schoolyard tunnel in Aris's file, the minor collapse, the breath he'd held too long, the scar tissue you can't see. She had read that sealed record because she asked to lead rock warfare on Mars, and Sable Index had said yes if she would agree to know who she was working for. She owed him gentle falls. She owed everybody gentle falls. At T+09:30, the open-deck Chariot finally betrayed its master. An overhang that had been waiting since Olympus Mons last through ash sighed and tilted. Niva's hammer kissed it, so lightly a geologist would have called it mercy. The overhang spooled away into dust and beads of glass. The Chariot's beacon flared, sputtered, then went silent. Saul's voice cut off mid-syllable. The mouth rift of his command became an O of surprise that tasted like thirst. Archive node. Meridian Gate. Commander voice, lost. Primary channel collapse. Order flow entropy, 0.92. Aris's team did not cheer. There is a kind of silence soldiers carry when a plan works too well. It is not relief. It is respect for how easy it is to become arrogant in the presence of tools you understand. He let the silence stretch, long enough to feel weight. Then he said, hold your safeties. We are not executioners. They were 30 specks against an ancient wall. They were a rumor, moving when wind moved, kneeling when the dust thinned. A single suppressed shot cracked somewhere, not to kill, but to persuade a squad to duck a heartbeat longer so a rib could finish its fall without breaking plates. Orrin whispered into his mic, brother line complete. Sister line, on your breath, document. Niva closed her eyes, counted with the wind, then touched the master. The sister line released, a grace note after the melody. 3P. Parallel gullies became 3 separate rooms with roofs you couldn't see because they were air and dust, and a decision made an hour ago by a woman who loved rocks more than almost anything. T+12:02. Laleh murmured, eyes on her timestamp. Last open corridor is kissing shut. There. The kiss was the little thup of sand finding a new angle of rest. A sound so small it could carry a war in it. Kethvar, the hardliner's hardliner, leaned his plate against the new wall and spoke into a channel he knew was broken. Prefect, we will cut through. We will claw this soft stone and make it remember the Dominion. Aris switched his external speaker on and let his voice fall down the gully like water. Don't, he said. Stone remembers better than you do. Keth snarled. Come down, human. Aris looked at Bram. Bram looked at Niva. Niva shook her head no, just a tilt. Aris listened to her. He listened to the weight of his own breath in his mask. He remembered dirt in his throat and the taste of fear you swallow to not become the kind of officer that tells men to do something small after it's too late. Sergeant, he said. A ladder. Bram lowered a rope ladder into the edge of the gully. It swung like a thin line between two kinds of pride. A single Arask corporal stared at it, as if it were a trick. It was not a trick. He didn't take it. Commander, Laleh said softly. Our clocks. Aris nodded. Count it. T+14:00. Gunfire had barely spoken. The canyon was quiet the way churches are quiet before a funeral when nobody wants to say what they're thinking. Sentinel Black / Relay 7B. T+14:12. Active kinetic exchange. Minimal. Terran losses. 0 Kia. 2 minor hypoxia. 1 hand contusion. Enemy cohesion. Null. Sable Index Tactical. Objective. Relay reactivation. Status. Achieved. Beacons relit along the shelf like city windows after a blackout. The abandoned relay, the one the Arask had come to secure as staging for something larger and more terrible than 300 banners, hummed with the small satisfaction of systems that like being useful. Laleh cracked her knuckles, smiled at the little ghosts, and shut them down one by one. Sleep, she told the fear machines. We won't need you for a minute. Aris descended only halfway down a scree path to where Sol Ikar had come to rest in a cul-de-sac with glass stone across his chariot like a lid not quite closed. The prefect was alive by inches and indignation. Dust turned his plates matte. His voice, when it came, had lost its extra mouths. You cheated, Sol said. Aris stood on a wedge of basalt and let the canyon's old cold sit in his boots. We paid attention. You used geology as a weapon. We asked the map to choose between your ego and our breath. Aris said. It chose. Sol spat dust. Honor. Honor would have been telling your men to wait when the ground started talking. Honor would have been saying, I don't know this stone in front of the flags you like to raise. Aris's tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. We warned the rock what to do. You warned your men to die. Kethvar, pinned in his own cul-de-sac by a rib laid gentle as a bar across a door, heard it over his bare audio. No comms left to dress it. He looked at his claws and then at the rock that had refused to be moved by them. He had a doctrine for enemy rifles, for armor, for artillery. He had not brought doctrine for dust that steals verbs. Somewhere overhead, a neutral voice spoke. Not cruel, not triumphant, only exact. Archive node. Meridian Gate. After action snapshot. Engagement. M-Canal Rim / Sable Weave. Duration. 14 minutes and 12 seconds. Terran force, 30. Arask force, 300. Enemy losses, minimal physical, maximum cohesion. Result, relay control transferred. Lesson, humans didn't crush the enemy, they crushed the map. Bram hauled the ladder back up. Orrin collected the brass token in his pocket and turned it over twice. Left, right. Niva powered down the master and stroked the casing the way you touch an instrument after a long recital that went right. Laleh stood at the relay console, its green telling her it was happy, and put a single bulletin up the chain. The words found their way through satellites and arrays and secure corridors until they arrived where war learns its next mistake. Aris lingered 1 minute more at the rim of the cul-de-sac, watching Sol's breath fog the thin air. The prefect looked up with eyes that had learned something the hard way and wished he could unlearn it. He tried, because hardliners always try. He bared his plates and hissed, a sound like a sermon on the virtues of not yielding. He said nothing. What could words do here? Aris stepped back. He felt his hand ache. The old tremor tugged once in the tendons. He flexed it open and closed. He remembered the garden hose, the straw tunnels, the way the lawn had collapsed in a soft sigh around him when he was 8, and how the world had taught him respect with a little dirt and no gravestone. He set the memory down where he kept things that mattered. He would carry it whole, not as weakness, as calibration. The Terrans exfiltrated as they had arrived, as rumors. The dust ate their footprints, the wind taking the rest, and filing it somewhere only Mars knows. A day later, an officer in a marble hall far from any stone that can teach you anything looked at the after-action from Meridian Gate and sneered. They didn't even fire. He signed a requisition for more troops. He colored arrows on a map. He never went to Valles Marineris. He never heard what rock says when it decides to be an instrument. Meanwhile, Sable Index Tactical appended a quiet note to a doctrine library without fanfare. The file had no victory laurel. It had a maintenance icon, a small wrench beside a globe, as if repair were more important than glory. Addendum: Pulse etiquette, canyon terrains, human usage. Key consideration: do not target soldiers when the topology can bear the burden. Key risk: pride becomes kinetic faster than stone does. Key counter: teach officers to hold their breath until the ground gives it back. Sol Car left Mars 3 weeks later under a gray sky that had learned how to keep its own counsel. He told his superiors the Terrans were cowards who hid behind geology. He said it because to say the other thing would break him where he had no plates. He forbade his sub-commanders from referencing the word map in their debriefs. He banned ladders on the trained assumption that an enemy who offers a rope has hidden blades on the rungs. In barracks stripped quiet for the night, an Arask corporal who had looked at a ladder and refused it the first time lay awake, mandibles still, listening to a sound that wasn't in the room, a heartbeat that had been human and calm and had led him away from anything that would have shot him. He wondered if cowardice might feel like survival. He wondered if honor could live in that feeling without dying of shame. He had no words for it. Words had been untrustworthy in the dust. He closed his eyes. He slept. On the rim, later, when patrols came to check the relay and found it not only working but humming as if someone had tuned it, they stood at the edge and looked down. They saw ribs like black organ pipes. They heard a wind that remembers. They did not know which grains of sand had moved at which moments to make verbs fall and bodies keep standing. They only knew the canyon learned something that morning, and it liked the lesson. Aris, back under a canvas that flapped like an old lung against a new frame, wrote a short line for himself in a book he kept and seldom read. Do not mistake mercy for weakness. He underlined it once, then closed the book and slept with his hand against the wall of the tent, feeling the faint vibrations of a planet that had always been a better tactician than men who liked flags. His hand trembled once in sleep. He dreamed of water finding its path, of sand making decisions, of children poking at earth with straws and learning where not to put their feet. At sunrise, Niva walked out onto the rim with coffee gone cold and spoke to the canyon like you speak to a musician after a perfect set. Thank you, she said, and meant it. The rock said nothing, but the dust fell in a little line that looked, if you wanted, like a nod. 2 galaxies away, a data center ingested the Atlas 47 PB update and ran its curvature corrections. Countless waves traveled through digital stone. Somewhere in the quiet between algorithms, a model learned the difference between crushing an enemy and crushing a map. The model had no pride. It would tell the next human officer the truth without fear of rank. It would say, if you can make the orders fall, you won't have to make the bodies do it. Archive node. Meridian Gate. Distribution notice. Lesson. In these canyons, orders fall. Status. Propagated. Enough. Stand down. You don't know what waits for you. Not if you speak louder T. Hanrock. Not if you think flags can pull a wall back into a cliff. Not if you believe that numbers alone are weight and not arrangement. The canyon will remember. It always does. They were wrong.